Speech Pitch by Iska Sak.
Hi there, and welcome back to Speech Pitch by Iska Sak. I'm Pascal.
And I'm Spyretta Leivaditi, and we will be your hosts for this episode. Today, we are very happy to have Erich Reiter and Lukas Latacz from Say It Labs, a company that creates voice-controlled video games for speech therapy. Welcome to Speech Pitch, Erich and Lukas.
Great, thanks for having us. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks.
So before diving into Say It Labs, we are curious to hear about your two respective academic and non-academic backgrounds and what led you to found the company. Could you please briefly give an outline on your career journey? Let's start with Lukas.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm a computer science engineer. And so after doing my master's, I started a PhD. And actually the first project I worked on was already about using speech technology for people with speech impairments and to use that technology also in education. And that was a really long time ago already. So nowadays that topic is more popular in academia. It's still a niche topic, let's say, but it's gaining more and more traction. But that was a very interesting project. So we tried many things. Typically didn't work that well, to be honest. And my task was I was working on text-to-speech, so that was also the topic of my PhD thesis. And I built a text-to-speech system for Dutch. And so also during my academic career, I continue to work with speech therapists. And so after finishing my PhD, I was thinking, okay, let's do something more with the knowledge that I gained and start up a company. But it took some time actually. So I also did a postdoc afterwards. And the idea was then to gain more knowledge about starting a company. And then during that time I also met Erich. So then we started Say It Labs basically. Yeah. So.
All right, well, I'll take over. Thanks, Lukas. Yeah, it was great when we met. I started a little bit, we had a very different journey. I started studying computer science and linguistics back in Montreal, and then I eventually did a master's in computational linguistics, combining the two. I was so excited about the idea of speech recognition technology. I had this professor who's told us it's going to be the future, and I focused on algorithms that were really specific to speech recognition, and then I landed one of my dream jobs out in California in Silicon Valley at a company called Nuance. Nuance was still a really young company back in 2004, and it was the original makers of Siri. So it was really cool to be part of a team that was going to be launching something that would become a ubiquitous system around the world. So I stayed at Nuance for 10 years. Some 7 years into that career, an eye awakening. A close friend of mine had a diagnosis of ALS. And then a couple of years later, Chris just couldn't talk anymore. He was restricted to a wheelchair and specifically to something called an AAC device, or an alternative and augmentative communication device, similar to what Stephen Hawking used to use. But it was laborious for him to use. And I remember the day it took him 3 minutes to say, I need water. It just took him forever to do anything, and eventually he became kind of ignored. And it broke my heart to have seen a guy evolve or disevolve from being such a vivacious and gregarious and strong guy to, sort of succumbing to this horrible disease. So I took a leap of faith and I quit everything and I became a speech therapist. I left and went back to school. I studied speech therapy, and the idea was I really wanted to create some sort of technology for people with speech disorders like my friend Chris. And what I did not know at the time was just how many people around the world have some sort of communication disorder. So along the way, Lukas and I met, and as Lukas said, we started Say It Labs, and that was back in 2019.
Oh, cool. Thanks a lot for your outlines. And that's quite some time, of course. And it would be very interesting to see then how exactly you actually met and how you agreed on starting Say It Labs, and what is basically the origin of the company there.
Yeah, so we actually, when we met through a common friend, and the idea was to start up the company with 3 people. As you can see, there are only 2 people here. And she just before starting the company, she kind of dropped out. It was not really something for her actually. And I think it's also, starting up a company, it's not something for everybody. I think you really need to have the passion and really like doing that. Otherwise, it's not so.
And also realize that it comes with huge risks. I mean, you start a company going from a place where, for me personally, working as an engineer in high tech, there's a lot of stability there. There's a lot of demand for work. And, when you start a company, you have to be risk averse. And that's really important for anybody who wants to start a company. So passion is important, knowing that there's major risks involved. But that's just sort of part of the deal. And it's not for everybody, and we recognize that. But Lukas and I, 5 years later, going strong.
Yeah, cool. And very interesting to see how this seems to be like more or less like by chance, right? Like through common friends. It's not like that you in San Francisco did a big shout out to everyone in Belgium, I guess, and were like saying like who is founding a company to me, but more like homebrew, like growing organically. So if it's all right for you, I would still linger a bit on that aspect and go into the details there. So were you already then in Belgium, both of you at this time, or were you in a pub? Like, do you have a specific occasion where you say, okay, this is really the founding of it? Or was it like, oh, just writing some emails, we know this guy? Yeah, like if you have some details there, I would be very curious.
Yeah, no, I was doing a fellowship in Texas, in Austin, Texas, and Lukas and I were communicating. I had met him in person, while I was living in Texas. I'd gone back to Belgium for a visit because things were getting more and more serious between our ambitions with the company. So it's also, with a 7-hour time difference, it was getting a little bit challenging. So I thought it made more sense for one of us to step up and move, get closer together. So I left, came back to Belgium. I had been here before already. And it just made a lot more sense to start together where we could be hyper or laser focused, sitting together, which we did almost every day. And you need a lot of that. You need to create inertia. You need momentum. And it's hard to do it if you've got a time zone difference, for one. And I think just that logic tells you, hey, if we start together, we can maybe, it's not 1 + 1 is 2, maybe 1 + 1 can be 3 or 4, or, with the intensity that we had in mind, it just made sense to try. Because if you don't try, you'll just never know. You'll never get anywhere.
Yeah, but some crazy commitment, I guess, especially coming from the States then and deciding to move, like at least for the time for founding the company to Belgium. That's a big step. And I'd be also interested then in what major challenges in general you faced right at the beginning when you decided to launch it and how you overcame them, maybe like as an inspirational story.
Yeah, one of the challenges, so I still had some funding. When Erich actually came to Belgium, we decided to also make use of that money, or because we also had some budget on that project to do some interesting things. So that were later than useful for a company, because it was the grant that I got was and sometimes there are special grants to encourage researchers to go to industry or to create their own company or to collaborate with industry. So it was a grant like that. Yeah, one of the challenges that we also faced was not only was partly, first of all, to raise some money to hire people, for example, to work on the product. And secondly, we also had some challenges with creating a spin-off company. I think Erich can smiles. Yeah.
It's true, and probably it's one of the pain points, it's just how unvanilla it is to go from a spin-off to a company, at least in Belgium. I know coming from the US, from US universities, normally there's a template, it's very standard, and in Belgium, to my surprise, it's not. So, that took almost a year to actually create the company from the time we decided we wanted to do it, simply because the negotiations with universities are difficult, they're challenging. But okay, that's part of the deal, as you go, that's part of it. But, very, very soon after we got the spinoff, we raised funds, we won an innovation grant, and we found angel investors, and we were off to the races. So, I mean, it turned out from a challenge to something great. And I think that if you start a company, it's constantly going to be a bunch of hills and ups and downs and, valleys and peaks. And it's constantly like that. You have days where, throughout these 5 years, you have days where you're just really on top of the world, and days where you're like, oh, shoot, how are we going to swim out of this one? And this was just maybe the first lesson that we learned, is that, okay, it's part of the game. And at the end of the day, you're the guy whose back is against the wall, and you've got to fight for the things that you want and the things that you believe in. And it's an amazing lesson. So it was okay. It all worked out so far.
Yeah, cool. And I mean, that actually gives me another question right to mind, because also coming from Germany, people always really complain about how difficult, especially like nowadays with AI and stuff, how difficult it is to form a startup or your own company. If we had already you in the US, Erich, so how come that you still decided to do this in Europe and go ahead with it in Europe? I mean, my admiration and stuff, is there some major decision point that made you say, okay, but we can overcome it? Or maybe you didn't know back then, or maybe Belgium is also better than Germany. So is there some decisive point why you didn't do this in the US, say it that way?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a couple of things. For one, I think I was maybe I was more mobile than Lukas at that point, for one. But the second thing is, it's a lot, this might sound surprising, but I mean, a salary in California is about 5 times the salary in Belgium. So it's significantly more, it's more financially interesting to do something in Belgium, despite the fact that the taxes are really high. But there's another thing, it depends on, the industry. Big pharma in Belgium gets a huge tax break. They pay like a very low corporate tax rate. And that idea was extended to high tech in Belgium in the mid 2010s, 2015, 16, 17. So when you combine, the idea of lower salaries to lower costs for your employees when you get there, combined with tax incentives, despite being in like the highest tax country in the world, certain things are calculated it just made a lot more sense. Now, in the future, it's possible that we could move the company to the US, but at this point, everything has been way more cost effective. And for somebody who worked in the Silicon Valley, I can tell you that the competency of my Flemish colleagues has been through the roof, has been extremely high, in my opinion, even outperforming my colleagues from the Silicon Valley. So I feel like you got the right amount of competency with the right amount of currency.
And that's also important. Create a company that also you have to manage your costs, and that you don't spend more money than you have actually, because that's not so good.
Yeah, so do the research when you start a company. Find out where it might be better geographically, because there's pros and cons to everywhere you live. And it requires some diligence, but hey, it's worth it in the long run.
Yeah, and actually moves us to our next question, which is how did it go for you? How did you secure like funding for the startup? Like, were there specific strategies that worked well for you?
I think, make Google's your friend. We started off with we started in an accelerator, and at the accelerator, we connected with other companies who were also in the same boat as us, looking for fundraising, having these side conversations, so important. We eventually met our first angel investors through one of our business coaches. And, I think part of, the company is not only the tech that we're developing, but it's also been a little bit commercial, knowing that, hey, if you don't have the funds, you have to be aggressive and that, and convince people. And I think, for Lukas and I, we don't often celebrate our victories, but every now and then we'll do one. And it was the first time we had a little toast to each other when we first secured our first small pot of gold. But you have to be diligent, self-belief. All of these things come with the territory. So,
and I think it's also interesting that Erich mentioned accelerator programs, because that also helped us. We participated in a few programs, and it's you get some extra background knowledge, but you also meet other entrepreneurs and other people, and so that's quite interesting to learn from each other, learn from mistakes that people made and so on, and also good things obviously. But I think that's very, very important actually.
Could you also give us some names of those programs that you participated in?
So there was the one that we participated in early on was called KBC Start It. So KBC is one of the big banks in Belgium, and they have a big accelerator. We were also part of another one by European Investment Bank, EIB Bank, through it was called the Social Innovation Tournament. That was more competitive, much more selective, and that was also a really great one to get into. So some of them are, KBC, it's also not quote unquote easy to get in. I think maybe 50% of applicants get accepted. EIB Bank, I think maybe less, 40% maybe? I'm not sure, 30%. EIB Bank, I think accepts less than 10%, maybe 5%. It's like very competitive. So when you apply to these accelerators, know what you're getting into. But those are a couple that we applied to. One was a European-based one was a Belgian-based one, or it was a Flanders-based. It's Belgian-based, yeah. So yeah.
Oh, so now we can move actually our focus to your company itself. So Seed Labs, could you also tell us in your own words for our audience what Seed Labs does and what products do you offer?
So in general, we combine artificial intelligence with speech therapy, and we combine the two to make a series of products. The majority of the products that we develop are video games, so speech activated or speech recognition based video games. But we also have other products that we are creating for people with Parkinson's disease, for example, which are not in the form of a video game. But the idea essentially is the same, where we're combining what we know of AI and what we know about speech therapy to create something that can be productive for people with any form of communication disorder.
Yeah, so we're going to get, of course, all into the meat and the details, especially stutter stars. We don't forget about this. But maybe also coming from the basis of the company, as you said, you both came from quite academic, or maybe Erich, you from this speech pathologist, also more of a already a bit applied background. But we would be very interested in how you transformed this more primary research-oriented role then into an actual business role, basically. How could you convert, or was it easy for you to convert, also adding these business responsibilities to your tech background, basically, or how to apply your tech background then successfully to a product?
Yeah, one of the reasons why I went back to become a speech language pathologist was because I wanted to have the experience working with the actual clients and understand their pain, understand the pain of the kids or the parents of these children, and really understand to see where, you learn a lot. You see, for example, the lack of intensive practice. You see that when you're working as a speech language pathologist and you have, 70, 80 kids a week on a caseload, that means you see them once a day for 30 minutes max. And most of the time you see kids who have common disorders and you group them together, and which just basically dilutes those precious minutes from 30 down to 10 minutes. And if you think about it, how much therapy are you going to really get in a week, and how much is that really going to aid in advancing or trying to quote unquote fix the disorder? So it was very clear that with an intensive type of model like speech recognition, you could completely change this paradigm. You could change this whole space by saying, okay, we know that if you want to get good at anything, you'll need repeated practice. And with speech recognition systems at the base or at the core of what we do, and if you can combine that with evidence-based speech therapy, you can change a lot of this space by just saying to parents or to kids who have a disorder, this is a form of practice that's based on what a speech therapist would do. And the business model would be, let's apply these two forms and put it out there to the world in some form. And at the time when we were starting the company, video games, it wasn't clear that video games were going to be that particular form. But it eventually evolved in we think the right way.
Yeah, when we started the company, Erich and I, we did not have a lot of experience in making video games. But we collaborated with a small company, which were video game designers. So they were helping other companies to create, not to implement the video games, but to think about video games, about game mechanics, game concepts. And so they introduced us to, they taught us how video games are actually being made. And that helped us also a lot in creating the products and thinking about how to put them on the market. And together with also, so we hired also, real video game developers and real video game illustrators that also have the experience to create the product. So that I think that's also important to work with the right people actually, to put your products on the market.
Actually, your first game app is Stutter Stars, right? An app that it's for people who are stuttering, and for our audience, stuttering is the involuntary repetition and prolongation of sounds, syllables, words, phrases. Would you like to give like a short description of the game, like the levels, what the player has to go through?
Yeah. So stuttering is that I'll just correct you a little bit. That's one of the definitions, but it's not the full picture. And I think Stutter Stars it's important for stuttering in particular. If they once said in speech therapy school that if you understand stuttering, you understand everything about speech therapy, because it's really like neurologically very, very complex. Yeah, so Lukas and I we were in touch with a couple of people like Dr. Susie Fosnot or Dr. Francis Freeman. Susie at the time was one of the executive members of the American Board of Fluency and Fluency Disorders, which is basically one of the gatekeepers of stuttering research. And we were able to do some early tests early on at a place called Camp Shoutout, which was hosted by a woman named Kristen Camilla, and she was the president of the American Board of Fluency and Fluency Disorders at the time. And throughout our journey, what we were experiencing were deep connections with these fluency specialists. And when we were talking to them, we would learn very quickly the types of things that they would do in their therapy. So we amassed a series of information that these top stuttering specialists would do with their clients when they were working on some of the motor aspects of speech. So the two main schools of thought for stuttering is acceptance and motor speech. Acceptance is basically let's accept, and either you can accept your speech the way it is, and you can either do something about it or you cannot do something about it. And the worldview that I share, these two worlds should coexist. You should be able to accept your stutter, but at the same time, you should be able to work on it if you want to. And what we created then in Stutter Stars is this amalgamation of all of these ideas that the fluency specialists, they do in their practice, and we put them into a video game. So we work on things like not only the interruptions of the speeches of speech. So if you have a block or a prolongation or a partial word repetition, but we also work on things like prosody. Prosody is the naturalness of speech, like stress or pitch changes or loudness or rhythm, for example. And then we also work on things like mindfulness. So we put together things like fluency shaping, prosody, mindfulness, all in a game. And those are the therapy techniques we actually create in a game, which is an extremely powerful series of techniques if one who stutters would like to work on improving their own fluency. But what we did is, in addition to creating or knowing that these are the techniques we want to work on, we packaged it. We packaged it in a video game. So the video game Stutter Stars, which is the fun part, it's about this horse named Zumi who loses his voice, and it's a journey of Zumi trying to get his voice back. And it's he goes from one island to another island to another island, and each island represents a distinct fluency technique. Each island also contains one character. Each character is a different shape, is a different form. You've got we're trying to reflect old characters, young characters, flexible characters, athletic characters, a whole spectrum, so that you can have some relatability to some of the characters. Maybe you yourself are a sporty guy, or maybe you yourself are a foodie. So whatever it is, you want to have some sort of relatability and practice. And there is this whole saying that if you tell a child to be quiet, they might be quiet for a couple of seconds. But if you tell a child to pretend that they're a soldier, you can get them to be quiet for significantly longer. Yeah. So if you get into this play-based mindset of a child, and you allow them to be the character which they are in this game, then what's happening is you get the intersection of a multitude of worlds. First, you're playing a video game. Second, you're using your voice. And if you combine those, what you're getting is intensive speech therapy, which is the ideal type of situation. That's sort of the creation of Stutter Stars. That's what it's supposed to represent.
Actually, how often should a player practice, and will you notice immediate, like maybe the therapist will notice improvements through the game? Like, does the game goes well with, let's say, an organized treatment from a therapist, from a speech therapist, I mean?
So we don't know exactly that. We don't know the exact answer to that question, but what we do know is that we lean on research that was done prior to us, so in other domains. So other domains related to speech therapy. So for example, in stroke rehabilitation or in dyslexia or also in ADHD, that work has already been done. And what people generally say is that you should practice every single day for at least 15 minutes, that's 1-5, and after about 6 to 8 weeks, you should start seeing neuro changes happening in the brain. That's the whole point of neuroplasticity, is that if you want to get good at anything, you'll need repeated practice, but you don't see the change from one day to the next. It's like going to the gym. You feel strong the next day, but it's because your muscles are aching, but changes really do take time. And this isn't any different for speech therapy, except that we're offering it in an intensive way. So intensive practice was shown in those other disciplines, and now we're kind of piggybacking off of previous research and just applying it now to stuttering.
Very cool. Yeah, this actually, along that line, I would be very interested in how you actually validated stutter stars clinically, if you did, or if there's some regulatory measures, especially in the EU, if you can sell it as a medical product actually, or prescribe it as a product, or how the status is there. Because what you say, I mean, this sounds very well funded, based in science, especially neuroplasticity and stuff being very important. So is there some research that you did there, some validation?
Yeah, so during the development of stutter stars, we conducted several small experiments actually to validate that it works, and we continuously monitor how things are working. And it's so, for example, when we started, we did a small study at Camp Shoutout with the first demo, and then 1 year later we did another small study with the first real version of stutter stars. So we tested it in a controlled environment, and then we did some more tests, and we continue to do that. We haven't published those results yet. We are collaborating with my former university where I did my PhD. So with Vrije Universiteit Brussel in Brussels, and also the University of Western Cape in Cape Town in South Africa, and we will do a research study to see how. Well, we are actually now conducting a research study to see how well stutter stars can be used in remote areas in South Africa.
Wow.
And we are also collaborating. Maybe Erich can tell something about that. There's a collaboration going on about rhythm. University of Michigan, or is it University of? I always forget what is the exact.
Well, it's actually both. It's with the University of Michigan and partially with Michigan State. Yeah. And there we're doing some more neurological research, independent research on the effects of rhythm and stuttering. So I mean, to Lucas's point, we try to validate everything that we do. Everything that we start, we started based on what the most recent science talks about. So for example, this always baffles me that people don't know why they stutter. Yeah, people say, "Oh, why do I stutter?" And we say, "Okay, let's take a step back. It's a neurological disorder. So, okay, the brain's complicated. Let's look into the brain. Why do we stutter?" So, we presented, Lucas and I presented our work at Oxford Fluency Congress, our conference, which is normally regarded as the most prestigious academic conference in the world for stuttering. And when we presented in 2020, the keynote speakers were talking about their neurological findings on what happens in the brain when we stutter, pinpointing to an area of the brain called the striatum, which is the area of the brain that's responsible for speech timing, speech initiation, and speech rhythm. So if you have a lesion at that level of the brain, you will stutter. And this is interesting for us to learn about. So if we can understand, where it happens, what is the point of the striatum, and what can you do about it, that's always our starting point. So we do the same thing for not only stuttering, but for the other areas of speech disorders like in articulation or Parkinson's. We have to understand the epicenter of the problem, so to speak. But yeah, so we always go from there, and then we branch out.
Cool, very cool. And thanks a lot for this background. And yeah, like as I said, it's cool that this is on one hand really like state-of-the-art, top-notch research, but on the other hand, also crazy that not all the mechanisms are fully understood yet. So yeah, very cool to build the product on that level already. And one small question also regarding Stutter Stars is that it's currently available in English, if I see it right. Did you experiment around also with other languages, or do you try to port it to other regions in the sense?
Yeah, so we already have a Dutch acoustic model which is ready to be included in the game. But it takes some time actually, so it's to translate stuff. We are planning to release Stutter Stars in different languages. The first language, well, after English will be Dutch, and we also are working, for example, on Portuguese. So we're training a new Portuguese acoustic model that could be used in Stutter Stars, and then other languages will follow. So we hope that we're a small startup, so we have limited resources, and we cannot do everything at once, unfortunately. And we can then reuse the speech technology in other products, obviously. So that's also very interesting for us.
Very cool. And so if I got it right, like you train basically separate ASR model that is underlying then the evaluation in the game. Like if you pronounced the task correctly, this is basically the thing that determines in which language it is available, right? You have an own custom automated speech recognition model, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. We have several models that we can choose for the specific task, actually. But everything needs to be, typically it's language dependent.
Yeah,
not everything is language dependent, but
it's not like a one size fits all.
No.
Cool, yeah. Then maybe transitioning to another very interesting topic that we saw. So I think on LinkedIn we saw a post where you also explore the interesting related project, also like for exploring further use cases in research and so on. We saw on LinkedIn a post where you explore the usage of smart glasses to assist people with Parkinson's disease. If that is a thing, we would be also very curious to hear about what is there maybe to come next, and how you're going about that.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, Lukas and I were we were visiting with Susie in California, and there were a couple of her clients who had Parkinson's or some forms of it, and we remembered, the stuff that she was working on in therapy, very great therapy, something called LSVT Loud, Lee Silverman speech therapy or voice therapy. And the idea behind this is just very simple. People with Parkinson's, one of the Parkinson's we typically think about these tremors. They're called cortical tremors. But 90% of people with Parkinson's also have a problem with their speech. And unfortunately with the disease, they lose that awareness of their own speech. I know exactly how loud I'm talking right now. I know how fast I'm talking right now. A person with Parkinson's loses that ability. So when they're with their partners, usually their partner will say, "No, I couldn't understand you. You're mumbling. I just couldn't get it," And it gets to they get to this breaking point where the speech becomes just harder and frustrating for the communication partners. So in speech therapy, they work on something where they work on the loudness of their speech or the rate of their speech. And while they're getting the feedback from a speech therapist, then that person generally improves really, really well. They're really receptive to that feedback. The moment they leave, what happens? They don't get feedback anymore. So the Parkinson's glasses is an integration of our speech technology with augmented reality. So you wear normal glasses and you'll get some visual indicator with the augmented reality while you're speaking. The idea is that if you're not speaking loud enough, or you can change the parameter where you want to maybe look at the rate of speech. And the idea is basically to give continuous feedback or feedback at the moment where you need it. So that instead of being reminded by your annoying communication partner, the glasses can discreetly tell you, this is what I need to do. It's a visual indicator.
Oh, super cool. I mean, this sounds like really top notch then, and super convenient, as you said, like as a big pain point in the lives of these patients. And I guess just from a technical perspective, looking from outside, like you have stutter stars and you have this Parkinson stuff, I guess it would be based then on similar models that you already have at hand and that you could then just adapt to that use case? Or is it a completely different new endeavor and research project?
Yeah, part of it is the same, but not everything. Yeah. Yeah, there are also some things that are not in stutter stars that we had available that we then used for the Parkinson glasses. Like for example, like a speech rate detector. In stutter stars we use a different speech rate detector actually based on the ASR model. But for the smart glasses we have something that can that's basically language independent, that just tries to works a bit differently. Yeah, I cannot say too much, tell too much about it, but you can imagine how it works probably. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Actually, I have a question on that because I was thinking that there might be different severity levels of Parkinson. And how do you believe that product will be affected by that?
Yeah, so this is not a product for everybody. I mean, for all people with Parkinson's. That's the first thing to realize. There's a big, if you look at people with Parkinson, typically we maybe Erich can explain it a bit better, that there are different phases of Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, it's true. And to Lucas's point, there's different phases. There's 5 phases of Parkinson's, and generally speaking, what happens in phase 1 is people start noticing these tremors in their fingers or their foot or something. They might get this diagnosis eventually, and they'll take some pharmacological solution, normally in the form of something called levodopa. And levodopa is really good at inhibiting or basically continuing to produce dopamine from a part of the brain called the substantia nigra. That's great, and that works well. But for speech, that doesn't help. It's a totally different system. So in these 5 phases of Parkinson's, people start noticing a diminished speech in what's called phase 2, or what's called the long phase. The long phase is usually 5 to 10 years. Typically it's 5, but it's nowadays with better medications, it gets extended more towards 10. And it's normally in this phase 2, which is that 5 to 10 year space or window, that we try to really help people with Parkinsonian speech. So you have to look at it holistically in what is the disease, where are the problems that you see, and how can you affect people in one way or another, how can you support them? And we look at it like, imagine that levodopa helps with the tremor. Imagine you have some sort of glasses that can help with your speech. You might gain an entire decade of mobility and speech where you previously wouldn't. And that's how we look at it.
Oh, very cool and very interesting, background also for Parkinson's disease. And as you said, interesting way to find the linkage point or the leverage point to tackle in this respective disorder. And so for this particular project, as you said, it's not a product yet, right? Or it's maybe only for the specific patients in phase 2. So do you plan to commercialize it as a project? Is it still just a research project? How is your vision for this basically? And how would you plan then to test it in practice?
Yeah, we're not really a research project. It's more like a development project. So we are developing the product itself. There are still some technical challenges, so it's especially in with multiple speakers, obviously, and in loud environments. It's not so easy. But the idea is to bring that product actually to the market. We got funding to work on this. So we got EU subsidies and also local subsidies here in Belgium to support this project. And with this funding, we are also able to test the glasses actually with actual people with Parkinson's disease.
Oh, very cool. And do you have also clinical partners to collaborate with, or is it?
So we work together with speech therapists from various hospitals in Belgium and the Netherlands.
Let's move on to a more a part of our podcast where it's a more advice to the next generations, let's call it. For those in our audience interested in social impact tech or are tackling healthcare issues, what advice would you give on starting and sustaining a meaningful business?
Okay, so when it comes to social impact, I think it's really interesting because I didn't initially make the switch to call myself a social impact entrepreneur until a couple of years later. This is the funny thing about being an entrepreneur, that you can wear many labels. And I think in life, this is true, right? I'm Erich, the speech language pathologist. I'm Erich, the volleyball player. I'm Erich, the Canadian snowboarder. We identify ourselves depending on where we are in life. And I think that if you come into the idea of I want to create a social impact enterprise, I don't know if that's necessarily the right approach. I think the approach is really about what's in your heart and what is in your heart where you think you can make a difference. And if you think that you can make a difference and you can make a business out of it, okay, that's step one. And see how far you can travel along that path. And eventually, if you pick up momentum and you can evolve yourself and then change who you see yourself to be, you can wear that label. I mean, anybody can wear that label, I suspect, but it's really about a mindset shift if you want to get into social impact entrepreneurship. And of course, there's a lot of space here. I mean, it's not just about helping people speak better, of course, In our social entrepreneurship adventure with EIB Bank, you met people who were creating various ways of social impact, whether it was helping people, helping victims of domestic violence, whether it was about, let's hunt less tuna and make seaweed taste like tuna instead, or, so many different things you can do for the environment. And it's a whole spectrum, Last year, we gave a talk at changenow.org in Paris, and that's a really interesting one because changenow.org, they all really, this is an organization that really focuses on the UN sustainability goals. And all of these sustainability goals are about social impact, at least for the most part, whether it's any type of inequity, any type of poverty, any type of water deficit. I mean, it's always going to have some sort of impact. So, the navigation advice I would give is go and figure out where are you in your heart and where does your heart meet one of these goals and what are your competencies and what drives you. And this is some sort of formula I think that you can apply if you want to get into that particular space.
And relatedly, if you put yourself into a position of now like a young researcher who enters the field of speech therapy tech, is there some particular advice that you would give them? I mean, of course, as you said, like if you want to go into social impact tech and stuff, figure out what skills you have and how you could help them, but maybe also from a founder career, later career experience point of view, what experiences would you see very valuable in this line and give along to such person as well?
I'd give a very good piece of advice, and there's a visualization of a standard deviation curve, right? You see a standard deviation curve, the sort of general bell curve. And if you are in the middle, you're at that 50% mark on the curve. And most people, if they take a test, they want to be all the way to the right and be at that 99th percentile. It means that they're smarter than everybody else, right? Everybody wants to be to the right of those curves. What we forget often about is what happens if you're on the 103rd percent or the minus 2nd percent, for example, just beyond the outskirts of this curve. Because if you are, then you're in a space where you actually kind of don't belong and you're not made for the curve. And there's a lot of people that fall on the outskirts of either side of this curve. And if you find those people, you'll find a lot of pain points and you'll find a huge need because the numbers are quite telling when you fall beyond. It's not that there's a minuscule amount of people that are there. There are many, and we fall beyond the shadows. And that's where, if you find those people, you'll find a lot of needs where you can really help people. In my particular case, it was just my friend Chris. I'd one person who fell off the curve. He was somebody who couldn't talk anymore. He was a social guy who became asocial, not through any reason or any fault of his own, because that's what happened in this horrible disease. And when you discover, if you open your eyes and you discover, there are a lot of people like Chris, and you'll see a lot of people who also fall in those boundaries. So my advice is try to get a magnifying glass and it'll open your eyes to see what's on either side of that bell curve.
Is there something similar that you have experienced, Lukas?
I think now is actually for people who are interested in what we do or what in general, let's say, using speech technology for health. I think it's a really interesting time at this moment to be working on that because a lot of things are moving. And it's not only us, for example, that are working on it, but also many other small companies and things will change actually in the coming years, will change actually a lot, I think. But you need to really like working on that topic, I think. I agree with Erich. If you do that for to gain some money. That's maybe not the right approach, I think, in this field. And maybe another type of advice, I think that Simon King from Edinburgh once told me, saying, I forgot actually the exact words that he told me, but it was something in the line of, that's good to actually do when you do a PhD, that you actually change topics. I mean, not 100% changing completely to a new field, but sometimes if you change it slightly, it can also give you new insights. So for example, because I was working mainly on text-to-speech before and going now to more to speech recognition, there are many things that I can reuse from the past, or there are some interesting things that I can reapply and that broaden my vision. And I think that also is interesting for other researchers.
Your idea is quite simple, but it's quite powerful. The idea is then, it's one of the advice that you got was, while you're doing your PhD, sometimes it's important to actually rethink the entire direction that you're going in. All that knowledge that you will have had acquired by that point could be useful, and you never know when it will be useful. In my case, going from the ASR world to speech recognition to speech therapy world, these worlds may seem completely unrelated. But by having the perspective of both worlds, you see how they intersect quite beautifully. And I think that's the advice that you're giving, which is coming from multiple disciplines, or even within the discipline that you're in, the idea of don't be so dogmatic about your perspective, because there's a lot of perspectives in the mirror, and those are things that are so important as you evolve as a person. It's like your frontal cortex just opens up and you start to see, all the different chess moves that you can make based on all the knowledge that you've acquired. And I think that's so important. And that's what you're alluding to.
So if I understood well what you both said, was that it's good to be passionate about something, but you have to also be open to the detours that your life, your research will bring you, because you never know what the path will give you. And sometimes it's good to change the path and go to a less traveled by, let's say.
My mom always says, and I always thought she was, I thought she was just being nice, but she was right. She always used to say, everything you do in your life will help. And she's right. She's so right. So she wasn't only being nice, she was also being wise. But it's true. I think it's true.
No, I agree. And to be honest, both me and Pascal, I don't believe we have very straightforward paths. We have made our crazy spice up our path, so we can definitely relate with what you just shared with us. Let's move to the next question, actually. How do you make time for yourself outside the professional commitment? Like how you balance your work and your life?
That's a really good question. How? When you start a company, at least, and Lukas and I know I can speak on behalf of him as I say this, you create a company and it becomes your baby. And I have 2 babies at home and I have 2 human babies at home. And it's hard, it's really hard, because I'm obviously more passionate about my children than I am about my job. But I don't consider Say It Labs my job. I consider it also as my passion. And it is a hard thing to do. And I certainly am not perfect at getting the right balance, because I work probably 7 days a week. And it's the first time that, not every single day is every single hour, but I work a lot. And when when summer vacation comes and the kids are not in school, I feel bad because I want to work more, and it's hard. So it's not an easy thing to get to. It's sort of like, people always, vacation's important, and we do take our vacations, and it's also our reminders that you have to take a break from work sometimes. It's not healthy to work all the time. So it's hard to not work when you're passionate about something. But I think maturity and having people like Lukas around us who are great soundboards, surround yourself with people who are like-minded and recognize that, you shouldn't feel guilty for one thing for taking a day off or taking a week off. You should not feel guilty for that when you work so hard. And I think it's great to surround yourself with like-minded people who kind of give you that freedom to say, hey, it's okay to take a step back, spend time with your children, spend time with your family, go and have a beer, go and do something that quote unquote normal people do because and you kind of forget it because if it would be my wish, I'd have 30 hours in a day, just more and more, but you just can't have that. So you got to balance. It's hard.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. It's also what we experienced, both Erich and I, is having a new child when you start right after you started up the company. It's typically not a good idea, actually. So that's another. But yeah, we could not. Yeah, that could have also helped us. But yeah, okay, things. Yeah.
That's life, right? Yeah.
Happen like that's life. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And how do you cope then? Like, do you also have some time that you set aside for family deliberately? Or like Lukas, are you then also like, I don't know, being forced by Erich to take time off? Or how is the dynamic there? Or you're coping for work-life balance?
Yeah, part is also, well, there are some duties, let's say. Yeah, the things that happen naturally, taking the kids to school holidays and so on. I mean, those things you're kind of obliged. I mean, yeah, it's not a really obligation, but I mean, it's something that you have to do for your kids. I mean, yeah, as Erich is saying, yeah, you're also, we care about the kids and family and but also about the job. I mean, about what we do. It's to be clear. Yeah, it's a different. Yeah.
I have a fun thing in my head right now. I don't know, of course, how old your children are, but would you like introduce them to your products, like Stutter Stars, play with them? Would you feel like cool? Hey, look what cool things I do when I'm not playing with you. I am designing this so we can play together. Or I don't know. Have you ever thought of that, or are you already doing it?
One of the voices in Stutter Stars is my son, so I definitely got him in early.
Nice.
Susie gave us the great term. I'll thank her for it, which is called junior faculty. And my daughter, who's 4, she's definitely an amazing faculty member, and she's so good at if we bring something in prototype and I see her playing it, then I know we're onto something cool. And my son, on career day, what do your parents do? He says, yeah, my dad makes video games and he feels like champion of the world. I mean, it's cool, So we definitely, he thinks that it's jackpot stuff. And yeah, so I think the communication it comes down to just communication. If you can talk about, I don't know, I think I saw my parents as good examples growing up. They were always super hardworking people, and they were always like passionate about what they did, and that maybe it trickled on to me in life, and which is show your children that it's okay to work hard, show them what grit means, show them like the real mechanics of going through the hard stuff, and bring them along the journey with you. Let them learn. I think that's such a cool lesson that we can teach our children, especially because like nowadays everything's like instant gratification society, and doing startup is certainly the opposite of that, so.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this is quite some nice way, especially also to involve the kids as a target audience and stuff.
Yeah, but it really helps also, to get more feedback is always helpful and to get, and also, well, I mean, it's also cool to see them play. I mean, yeah, it's actually super cool. Yeah.
It's games for children, so of course, naturally, it makes sense to involve them already. Yeah.
Now you made me curious about the screen time that they are allowed to have.
Yeah.
But that's another story for another podcast, I guess.
That's another podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, we're almost at the end. We have this one small section where we ask our guests to come up with another question for the next guest. So we will ask you the question that our previous guest, Titouan was asking you without knowing that it would be you, basically. And then if you want to, you can also come up with some overall question. It doesn't have to be something particular, just on the field of speech technology, speech research. But so what Titouan is asking you is, what is right now and for the next few years the biggest challenge to overcome so that your solution, like your products, will work, basically?
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
I'll take a first stab at it, and Lukas, I'll give you some time to think about a better answer. But, the hardest thing for us is that speech recognition, our acoustic models for people with speech disorders are very limited. And staying ahead of that curve and being able to continuously create these models out of nothing, out of our own data, has been the biggest challenge from the onset. And I think continuing to evolve that, and that's always challenging. If you talk about ChatGPT, for example, and how you can have a ChatGPT 4, so here we are, the end of 2024, and you can say, okay, you can have these speech conversations. That's great for people who have non-disordered speech. But you bring in disordered speech into this, it changes everything. And it's the effectiveness of ChatGPT, believe me, will not be so inspiring, at least not yet. And I think that's something that's, for me, for us, as I've seen us where we struggled the most, that's been hard because it's just blood, sweat, and tears, collecting data, annotations, and furthermore, Lukas, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think definitely having more annotated data and good data is quite important for us and for other people. And it's difficult to get that data. So I advise all researchers to produce more public databases and nicely annotated, and that many companies and many research groups can use them. That would be very good. So please do that. I think also one of the challenges actually that we faced is that, yeah, when you test, for example, your game or your app in a real situation, I mean, but when people at home use it, it's, yeah, you don't know beforehand always how people are going to use it. And for example, there could be loud background music, there could be multiple people speaking actually at the same time. And in a, let's say, in an ideal research scenario with a clean database, you typically don't have that type of data. So you only know actually how good your product is when you actually have created the first version and you hope that everything works, but then yeah, you get them very, very noisy and very weird data actually coming in, or people are using the product in a way that you never envisioned it, like two people speaking at the same time. So it's weird things happen, but yeah, I mean, it's therapeutically interesting.
So, okay, thank you. No, the questions are your answers are really good. And what is your question to our next guest?
Yes, I was just curious if there's any movement, whether you're working on ASR or text-to-speech, towards moving from a monolingual system to a multilingual system.
I can already see, small smokes coming out from our next speakers. It's quite a challenging question.
Relatedly, I would be very curious if there are ways that listeners from Speech Pitch could support Sayed Labs directly, or do you have some open calls maybe for listeners?
Yeah, so we are always looking for new interns to work together with us for a few months. And yeah, one particular topic that we are currently working on, for example, with the Parkinson classes, is target speaker extraction and speaker diarization. So if people are working on that topic, please contact us. It would be helpful. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Erich and Lukas. It was such a fun discussion we had together today.
Thank you, Spyretta and Pascal, for having us. It's been great being here.
It was very nice to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Also from my side, thanks so much. And of course to audience, thanks a lot for listening, and stay tuned for future episodes of Speech Pitch, where we might interview your favorite speech researchers and entrepreneurs. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcasts, and also follow the ISCA-SEC on X and LinkedIn, where we share our latest news with you.
Speech pitch by Iska Sak.